The message came on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning that smelled like rain and regret. Elena was sitting at her small kitchen table, sipping instant coffee that had long gone cold when her phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Mom. Her stomach tightened. They hadn't spoken in 2 weeks, not since their last argument about money. Still, some foolish part of her hoped it was an apology, or at least a small olive branch. But when she opened the text, all the air seemed to drain from the room. Don't call or come over. We're done. Elena reread the message 3 times, half expecting the words to rearrange themselves into something softer. They didn't. She set the phone down slowly, her pulse thudding in her ears. Outside, the rain started tapping against the window, steady, deliberate. It felt like the world itself was pausing to witness this moment. Her mother, Patricia, had always been dramatic, but this was different. This was final. No explanation, no argument, just a digital execution. A bitter laugh escaped Elena's lips. She typed her reply without thinking. Thanks for the $42.00 lesson, Mom. She hit send before she could stop herself. The words looked so small on the screen, but they carried years of pain and $42,000 worth of betrayal. It had started 2 years ago when Patricia called Elena in tears, saying she was in temporary financial trouble. She'd lost her job, her credit score had plummeted, and she just needed a co-signer for a loan to get back on her feet. Elena remembered how her heart had clenched at the sound of her mother crying. She'd always wanted to make Patricia proud, to be the kind of daughter worth loving. So she said yes, she co-signed, she transferred money. She even took out a small personal loan to help cover the emergency. Her mother promised she'd pay every cent back. She promised it was just a few months, but those months turned into silence, then excuses, then avoidance. And then, finally, the truth: Patricia had used the money to renovate her kitchen and take a vacation with her new boyfriend. When Elena confronted her, Patricia turned it around. You think I don't deserve something nice, after all I've done for you? That was Patricia's gift, turning guilt into a weapon. Now, sitting in the dim light of her apartment, Elena stared at her reflection in the black screen of her phone. She looked older than 29. Maybe betrayal did that to a person, carved years into their skin. The $42.00 wasn't just money. It was her future, her savings, her trust, and her mother had taken it like it was nothing. Elena's chest ached, but underneath the sorrow, something else stirred, a quiet, simmering strength. She took a deep breath, deleted her mother's number, and whispered to herself, lesson learned. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the daughter chasing approval. She felt like a woman finally waking up. Outside, the rain fell harder, washing the world clean, or maybe, finally, washing her free. Elena used to believe that love meant loyalty, no matter the cost. That's what her mother had taught her, not through words, but through expectation. As a child, she'd grown up in a house where silence was louder than shouting. Patricia wasn't the nurturing kind of mother. She was the type who cared more about appearances than affection. Everything had to look perfect: the house, the family, the photos. But behind the smiles was a tension Elena could feel even before she had the words to name it. Don't embarrass me. Patricia would whisper before school events, tightening the ribbon in Elena's hair until her scalp stung. Smile, sweetie, people don't like sad girls. And so Elena learned to perform happiness. Even when her parents divorced, even when Patricia's moods swung like a pendulum between cold indifference and sudden warmth, Elena stayed quiet. She thought if she just loved her mother enough, maybe things would change, but love had a funny way of turning into debt with Patricia. Every act of kindness came with an invisible price tag. After the text, "We're done," Elena couldn't stop the flood of memories. She thought about birthdays where her gifts to her mother were met with criticism. You spent too much, Patricia would scold, even as she tucked the designer scarf around her neck. Or the times Elena had tried to share her achievements getting into college, landing her first job, only to hear, "That's nice. But when are you going to do something impressive?" So when the loan came up, helping Patricia felt like another test she had to pass. If she said no, she'd be selfish. If she said yes, maybe finally her mother would see her as good, Now, with the weight of $42,000 pressing on her chest, she realized how deeply she'd been conditioned to by her mother's love. At night, Elena found herself scrolling through old photos. There was one from years ago, her and Patricia at a beach resort, both smiling under a pink sunset. It looked like happiness, but Elena remembered what came before the photo, an argument about money. Her mother had insisted Elena pay for the trip, calling it a bonding experience. She'd paid, of course. Elena closed her laptop and sat in silence. The room felt small, but in that smallness, there was truth. She wasn't the naive daughter anymore. She was a woman standing at the edge of a long, overdue reckoning. The next morning, she began to gather every document related to the loan, bank statements, receipts, emails. At first, she wasn't sure why. Maybe she just needed proof, not for the world, but for herself, that it had really happened. That she hadn't imagined the betrayal. As she placed each paper in a folder, a strange calm settled over her. It wasn't revenge she wanted. It was closure. For years, Patricia's approval had been the axis her world spun around. Now that axis had cracked, and for the first time, the world stopped spinning. She could finally stand still. She could finally breathe. Time, it turned out, was the best disinfectant. 3 months passed after that final text, and though the wound was still tender, the bleeding had stopped. The silence between Elena and Patricia had grown wide enough to fit an entire life inside it, and Elena was starting to fill that space. She'd thrown herself into work, staying late at the marketing firm, where she'd recently been promoted to project manager. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers every late night, every small victory, earned without anyone's help. Still, her mother's shadow lingered. Patricia had started telling people that Elena had abandoned her family. At first, it didn't matter. Elena wasn't close to her relatives anyway. But soon, cousins stopped replying to texts, and even her younger brother, Adam, grew distant. When she finally called him, his voice was cold. "Mom says you're too good for us now," he muttered. "I paid her debt, Adam. $42,000. You know that." He hesitated, then said softly, "She told us you offered. Said it was a gift." Elena closed her eyes, of course. Patricia always found a way to twist the story until she was the victim. That night, Elena sat in bed, clutching the folder of documents she'd collected, proof of every transfer, every message, every promise broken. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth. For once, she wanted to see her mother clearly, without the fog of guilt and longing. Weeks turned into months. One morning, Eleanor received an email from her bank, a notice of suspicious activity. A credit card application had been submitted under her name. She froze. The address listed wasn't hers. It was Patricia's. For a long moment, Elena just stared at the screen. Her hands didn't even shake. It was as if she'd been expecting this all along. Instead of calling her mother in rage, she took a deep breath and called the fraud department. She filed a report, closed her accounts, and even contacted a lawyer. She was done being silent. The investigation moved quickly. Within weeks, Patricia's access to several accounts was blocked, and the whispers around the family changed tone. "Did you hear what she did? She used her own daughter's name." Elena didn't gloat. She didn't reach out. She simply watched from a distance as the perfect image her mother had built, the smiling, respectable woman, began to crumble under its own lies. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, Elena sat at a cafe across from her office, her laptop open and her phone buzzing with work messages. Her reflection in the window looked calm, almost unrecognizable. She thought about sending another text to her mother, something biting, something that would sting the way Patricia's words had stung her. But she didn't. She just smiled to herself, whispering under her breath, "Thanks for the $42,000 lesson, Mom." Because the truth was, she had learned something. She'd learned how to stand up for herself, how to protect her peace, how to build a life that didn't depend on anyone's approval, not even her mother's. And that was worth more than every dollar she'd lost. A year had passed since the final text, and Elena barely recognized the woman she had become. The grief and anger that had once gripped her chest now felt like distant echoes, reminders of a lesson painfully learned but fully absorbed. She had moved to a new city, renting a small loft bathed in sunlight. The walls were bare but bright, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and possibility. Her work at the marketing firm had grown into a new venture, a small consulting business helping young women protect themselves from financial manipulation, whether from family or partners. Every story she heard mirrored pieces of her own past, and every success she celebrated felt like quiet reclamation. One morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. The envelope was thin, the handwriting unfamiliar, but the return address made her pause. Patricia, her first instinct was to shred it, to protect the fragile calm she had built. But curiosity nudged her fingers, and she opened the letter carefully. The words inside were short, trembling. "I know I've ruined things between us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you are well. I am struggling." Elena felt a flicker of the old anger, sharp, cold. Her mother had caused years of pain, cost her $42,000, and yet here she was, reaching out only when it suited her. She set the letter down, took a deep breath and smiled. Not a triumphant smile, but one of deep understanding. She wrote back on a crisp sheet of paper, every word deliberate. "I hope you find peace. I already did." She didn't need closure from her mother. She had created her own. The power Patricia had once held over her life had evaporated, replaced by autonomy, clarity, and self-respect. In the months that followed, Elena's life blossomed in ways she hadn't imagined. She traveled for work, took long walks by the river in her city, and watched her business grow steadily. Her clients looked up to her not because she had wealth or social standing, but because she had survived and emerged stronger. Every workshop, every seminar, every small success was a reminder that her worth was hers alone to define. Sometimes she still thought of Patricia, wondering if she had changed, if she had learned any lesson herself. But she quickly pushed the thought away. It no longer mattered. One rainy evening, Elena sat on her balcony, the city lights reflected in puddles on the street below. She sipped tea and glanced at her phone. The same phone that had carried that last, devastating text. She had kept a screenshot of it, not as a relic of pain, but as a symbol of the moment she decided to stop chasing love that wasn't freely given. She whispered to herself, almost as if confirming it for the universe, lesson learned and freedom earned. Outside, rain fell again, steady and deliberate, washing the streets clean. Elena felt its rhythm in her chest, in her heart, in her soul. She didn't need anyone to validate her life. She didn't need approval, pity, or gratitude. She had everything she had ever truly wanted, her own power, her own voice, and her own peace. And for the first time, she felt it fully. Freedom tastes like forgiveness, not for her mother, but for herself. Elena closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The storm outside was nothing compared to the calm she had found within. And in that moment, she knew she was finally, completely free.